The old lime tree, with its great trunk gnarled with the passing of nearly 9 centuries, the deep well cut through the heart of the rock by those captives of old, and the lovely view from the city wall whence we heard, spread over almost a full quarter of an hour, the multitudinous chimes of the city, had all helped to wipe out from our minds the incident of the slain kitten. We were the only visitors who had entered the torture tower that morning, so at least said the old custodian, and as we had the place to ourselves, were able to make a minute and more satisfactory survey than would have otherwise been possible. The custodian, looking to us as the sole source of his gains for the day, was willing to meet our wishes in any way. The torture tower is a truly grim place, even now when many thousands of visitors have sent a stream of life and the joy that follows life into the place. But at the time I mention, it wore its grimmest and most gruesome aspect. The dust of ages seemed to have settled on it, and the darkness and the horror of its memories seemed to have become sentient in a way that would have satisfied the pantheistic souls of Philo or Spinoza. The lower chamber where we entered was seemingly, in its normal state, filled with incarnate darkness. Even the hot sunlight streaming in through the door seemed to be lost in the vast thickness of the walls, and only showed the masonry rough as when the builder's scaffolding had come down, but coated with dust and marked here and there with patches of dark stain which, if walls could speak, could have given their own dread memories of fear and pain. We were glad to pass up the dusty wooden staircase, the custodian leaving the outer door open to light us somewhat on our way. For to our eyes the one long-wicked, evil-smelling candle stuck in a sconce on the wall gave an inadequate light. When we came up through the open trap in the corner of the chamber overhead, Amelia held on to me so tightly that I could actually feel her heart beat. I must say for my own part that I was not surprised at her fear, for this room was even more gruesome than that below. Here there was certainly more light, but only just sufficient to realize the horrible surroundings of the place. The builders of the tower had evidently intended that only they who should gain the top should have any of the joys of light and prospect. There, as we had noticed from below, were ranges of windows, albeit of medieval smallness, but elsewhere in the tower were only a very few narrow slits such as were habitual in places of medieval defense. A few of these only lit the chamber, and these so high up on the wall that from no part could the sky be seen through the thickness of the walls. In racks, and leaning in disorder against the walls, were a number of headsmen's swords, great double-handed weapons with broad blade and keen edge. Hard by were several blocks whereon the necks of the victims had lain, with here and there deep notches where the steel had bitten through the guard of flesh and shored into the wood. Round the chamber, placed in all sorts of irregular ways, were many implements of torture which bade one's heart ache to see, chairs full of spikes which gave instant and excruciating pain, chairs and couches with dull knobs whose torture was seemingly less, but which, though slower, were equally efficacious. Racks, belts, boots, gloves, collars, all made for compressing at will. Steel baskets in which the head could be slowly crushed into a pulp if necessary. Watchmen's hooks with long handle and knife that cut at resistance. This is a specialty of the old Nuremberg police system, and many, many other devices for man's injury to man. Amelia grew quite pale with the horror of the things, but fortunately did not faint. For being a little overcome, she sat down on a torture chair but jumped up again with a shriek, all tendency to faint gone. We both pretended that it was the injury done to her dress by the dust of the chair and the rusty spikes which had upset her, and Mr. Hutchinson acquiesced in accepting the explanation with a kind-hearted laugh. But the central object in the whole of this chamber of horrors was the engine known as the Iron Virgin, which stood near the center of the room. It was a rudely shaped figure of a woman, something of the Bell order, or, to make a closer comparison, of the figure of Mrs. Noah in the Children's Ark, but without that slimness of the waist and perfect rondeur of the hip, which marks the aesthetic type of the Noah family. One would hardly have recognized it as intended for a human figure at all, had not the founder shaped on the forehead a rude semblance of a woman's face. This machine was coated with rust without, and covered with dust. A rope was fastened to a ring in the front of the figure, about where the waist should have been, and was drawn through a pulley fastened on the wooden pillar which sustained the flooring above. The custodian pulling this rope showed that a section of the front was hinged like a door at one side. We then saw that the engine was of considerable thickness, leaving just room enough for a man to be placed. The door was of equal thickness and of great weight, for it took the custodian all his strength, aided though he was by the contrivance of the pulley, to open it. This weight was partly due to the fact that the door was of manifest purpose, hung so as to throw its weight downwards, so that it might shut of its own accord when the strain was released. The inside was honeycombed with rust, nay more, the rust alone that comes through time would have hardly eaten so deep into the iron walls. The rust of the cruel stains was deep indeed. It was only, however, when we came to look at the inside of the door, that the diabolical intention was manifest to the full. Here were several long spikes, square and massive, broad at the base and sharp at the points, placed in such a position that when the door should close, the upper ones would pierce the eyes of the victim, and the lower ones his heart and vitals. The sight was too much for poor Amelia, and this time she fainted dead off, and I had to carry her down the stairs and place her on a bench outside until she recovered. That she felt it to the quick was afterwards shown by the fact that my eldest son bears this day a rude birthmark on his breast, which has, by family consent, been accepted as representing the Nuremberg Virgin. When we got back to the chamber, we found Hutchison still opposite the Iron Virgin. He had been evidently philosophizing, and now gave us the benefit of his thought in the shape of a sort of exordium. "Wall, I guess I've been learning something here while Madam has been getting over her faint. 'Pears to me that we're a long way behind the times on our side of the big drink. We used to think out on the plains that the Injun could give us points in trying to make a man uncomfortable, but I guess your old medieval law and order party could raise him every time. Splinters was pretty good in his bluff on the squaw, but this here young miss held a straight flush all high on him. The points of them spikes air sharp enough still, even though the edges air eaten out by what used to be on 'em. It'd be a good thing for our Indian section to get some specimens of this here play toy to send round to the reservations just to knock the stuffin' out of the bucks, and the squaws too, by showing them as how old civilizations lays over them at their best. Guess but I'll get in that box a minute just to see how it feels." "Oh, no," said Amelia, "it's too terrible." "Guess, ma'am, nothing's too terrible to the explorin' mind. I've been in some queer places in my time. Spent a night inside a dead horse while a prairie fire swept over me in the Montana Territory, and other times slept inside a dead buffer when the Comanches was on the warpath, and I didn't care to leave my yard on them. I've been 2 days in a caved-in tunnel in the Billy Bronco gold mine in New Mexico, and was one of the 4 shut up for 3 parts of a day in the case on what slid over her side when we was setting the foundations of the Buffalo Bridge. I've not funked an odd experience yet, and I don't propose to begin now. We saw that he was set on the experiment, so I said, "Well, hurry up, old man, and get through with it." "All right, General," said he, "but I calculate we ain't quite ready yet. The gentlemen, my predecessors, what stood in that thar canister, didn't volunteer for the office, not much, and I guess there was some ornamental tying up before the big stroke was made. I want to go into this thing fair and square, so I must get fixed up proper first. I dare say this old galoot can rise some string and tie me up according to sample." This was said interrogatively to the old custodian, but the latter, who understood the drift of his speech, though perhaps not appreciating to the full the niceties of dialect and imagery, shook his head. His protest was, however, only formal and made to be overcome. The American thrust a gold piece into his hand, saying, "Take it, pard. It's your pot, and don't be skeered. This ain't no necktie party that you're asked to assist in." He produced some thin frayed rope and proceeded to bind our companion with sufficient strictness for the purpose. When the upper part of his body was bound, Hutcheson said, "Hold on a moment, Judge. Guess I'm too heavy for you to tote into the canister. You just let me walk in, and then you can wash up regarding my legs." Whilst speaking, he had backed himself into the opening, which was just enough to hold him. It was a close fit and no mistake. Amelia looked on with fear in her eyes, but she evidently did not like to say anything. Then the custodian completed his task by tying the American's feet together so that he was now absolutely helpless and fixed in his voluntary prison. He seemed to really enjoy it, and the anticipant smile which was habitual to his face blossomed into actuality as he said, "Guess this here Eve was made out of the rib of a dwarf. There ain't much room for a full-grown citizen of the United States to hustle. We uster make our coffins more roomier in Idaho Territory. Now, Judge, you just begin to let this door down slow onto me. I want to feel the same pleasure as the other jays had when those spikes began to move toward their eyes." "Oh, no, 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 no," broke in Amelia hysterically. "It is too terrible. I can't bear to see it. I can't. But the American was obdurate. "Say, Colonel," said he, "why not take Madam for a little promenade? I wouldn't hurt her feelings for the world, but now that I am here, having kim 8,000 miles, wouldn't it be too hard to give up the very experience I've been pinning and panting for? A man can't get to feel like canned goods every time. Me and the Judge here'll fix up this thing in no time, and then you'll come back, and we'll all laugh together." Once more the resolution that is born of curiosity triumphed, and Amelia stayed, holding tight to my arm, and shivering whilst the custodian began to slacken slowly, inch by inch, the rope that held back the iron door. Hutcheson's face was positively radiant as his eyes followed the first movement of the spikes. "Wall," he said, "I guess I've not had enjoyment like this since I left New York. Bar a scrap with a French sailor at Wapping, and that warn't much of a picnic neither. I've not had a show for real pleasure in this dod rotten continent, where there ain't no bars, nor Injuns. and where nary man goes healed. Slow there, Judge. Don't you rush this business. I want to show my money for this game. I do. The custodian must have had in him some of the blood of his predecessors in that ghastly tower, for he worked the engine with a deliberate and excruciating slowness, which after 5 minutes, in which the outer edge of the door had not moved half as many inches, began to overcome Amelia. I saw her lips whiten and felt her hold on my arm relaxed. I looked around an instant for a place whereon to lay her, and when I looked at her again, found that her eye had begun fixed on the side of the Virgin. Following its direction, I saw the black cat crouching out of sight. Her green eyes shone like danger lamps in the gloom of the place, and their color was heightened by the blood which still smeared her coat and reddened her mouth. I cried out, "The cat! Look out for the cat!" For even then she sprang out before the engine. At this moment she looked like a triumphant demon. Her eyes blazed with ferocity, her hair bristled out till she seemed twice her normal size, and her tail lashed about as does a tiger's when the quarry is before it. Elias P. Hutchinson, when he saw her, was amused, and his eyes positively sparkled with fun as he said, "Darned if the squaw hain't got on her all war paint. Just give her a shove off if she comes any of her tricks on me, for I'm so fixed everlastingly by the boss that my derned skin if I can keep my eyes from her if she wants them. Easy there, Judge. Don't you slack on that there rope or I'm euchred." At this moment Amelia completed her feint, and I had to clutch hold of her round the waist, or she would have fallen to the floor. Whilst attending to her, I saw the black cat crouching for a spring, and jumped up to turn the creature out. But at that instant, with a sort of hellish scream, she hurled herself, not as we expected at Hutchinson, but straight at the face of the custodian. Her claws seemed to be tearing wildly as one sees in the Chinese drawings of the dragon rampant, and as I looked I saw one of them light on the poor man's eye and actually tear through it and down his cheek, leaving a wide band of red where the blood seemed to spurt from every vein. With a yell of sheer terror which came quicker than even his sense of pain, the man leaped back, dropping as he did so the rope which held back the iron door. I jumped for it, but was too late, for the cord ran like lightning through the pulley block, and the heavy mass fell forward from its own weight. As the door closed, I caught a glimpse of our poor companion's face. He seemed frozen with terror. His eyes stared with a horrible anguish as if dazed, and no sound came from his lips. And then the spikes did their work. Happily, the end was quick, for when I wrenched open the door, they had pierced so deep that they had locked in the bones of the skull, through which they had crushed, and actually tore it out of his iron prison till, bound as he was, he fell at full length with a sickly thud upon the floor, and the face turning upward as he fell. I rushed to my wife, lifted her up, and carried her out, for I feared for her very reason if she should wake from her faint to such a scene. I laid her on the bench outside and ran back. Leaning against the wooden column was the custodian, moaning in pain, whilst he held his reddening handkerchief to his eyes. And sitting on the head of the poor American was the cat, purring loudly as she licked the blood which trickled through the gashed socket of his eyes. I think no one would call me cruel, because I seized one of the old executioner's swords and shore her in two as she sat.
Like, subscribe. Thank you.